All right, hello everyone. So for today's lesson, we're going to look at revolutions in Central and South America. So our objectives and standards to recognize the effects the French Revolution had on revolutions in other countries and to analyze the role and leadership of key figures in revolutionary movements. And you can also take a look at our standards there if you'd like to as well. So I want you to think about this. How do you think the ideals and principles of other movements impact the world? Remember, we discussed the Enlightenment and how the Enlightenment kind of led to revolutions in the American colonies and in France. So, how do you think these ideas of the Enlightenment and even these ideas from the revolutions that we've discussed so far are going to impact the rest of the world? Okay, our essential question: how did Latin American countries gain independence? So Creoles become leaders. If you remember from class, we discussed the class structure in many Latin American countries and what Creoles' place in that class structure was. So many Creoles were wealthy and educated, and some traveled to Europe and learned of Enlightenment ideas. And of course, they brought these ideas back with them to their countries. Um, when Napoleon removed the Spanish king and put the French king on the throne, many Creoles were upset with this. So by 1810, many Latin American countries began rebelling and looking for independence. So Venezuela's fight. So Simon Bolivar, and as I said before, I probably pronounced that wrong, a wealthy Creole led the revolutionary movement in Venezuela. So in 1811, Bolivar declared the country independent from Spain. Now, Bolivar and his volunteer army were unsuccessful against the Spanish at first. And in fact, Bolivar is going to have to leave the country and go into hiding for some time because the Spanish are looking for him. But in 1819, Bolivar and his troops catch the Spanish off guard, and they won a decisive battle. So in 1821, Venezuela will become an independent country. Here's a picture of Mr. Bolivar there. So Argentina helps out. So Argentina had declared its independence in 1816. However, there were Spanish forces still around the area in neighboring countries such as Chile and Peru that were kind of a threat. So Jose de San Martin led troops to remove the remaining Spanish forces out of Peru. Okay? And again, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. But he worked with the people in those countries to remove the Spanish forces from their countries. He also worked with Simon Bolivar to defeat the Spanish and helped free Latin American countries from their rule. So he meets up with Bolivar, and they agree to work together to rid South American countries of Spanish forces. And here's a portrait of him as well. So Mexico calls for independence. In 1810, a priest named Padre Miguel Hidalgo issued a call for rebellion against the Spanish based on Enlightenment ideas. Now, the priest, he was, not the wealthiest person, but he had, paid attention to a lot of the Enlightenment ideas that were going on around the world. So he rings the church bell and he calls people in this village, to come and listen to him speak. And he tells the people, they need to, fight for independence and things like that. And he also calls for this march to Mexico City to protest Spanish rule. And he led a group of about 80,000 men to march in a march to Mexico City. When they arrived there, of course, this is a lot of men, it's a big group of people. So many wealthy citizens and Spanish soldiers were fearful of the group with good reason. Many of them were worried, what are they going to do? Are we going to lose our power? Eventually, Hidalgo was defeated by the Spanish army, but the main thing is that he started this idea and this call for revolution for independence in Mexico. So through the next few years, many leaders still control the revolutionary movement. Different people are going to come to power. They're going to, come to power and fail or leave or whatever. But the main thing was in Mexico was that, they weren't really united in their desire for revolution. So in 1820, the Spanish government changed, and everyone in Mexico is fearful that they may lose power, that this new Spanish government is going to take away a lot of their power, a lot of their rights, a lot of their freedoms. So at this point, Mexico becomes united in their call for independence. So in 1821, Mexico does finally become an independent country, and Mexico used to encompass the entire Central American section there. And eventually other countries such as Panama and those places are going to call for their independence. Now, at first, Mexico is not going to grant it, even though they had, want independence. They're not going to allow these countries to leave, but eventually they do grant them their independence, and they become their own countries as well. So let's talk about Brazil. Brazil was under the rule of Portugal. Now, again, we talked about in another class how Napoleon was trying to get to Portugal to force them to accept his plans. And when Napoleon was on his way to Portugal, the royal family flees the country for Brazil when Napoleon invaded. Now, they're going to rule from Brazil for 14 years until finally Napoleon is exiled and removed from power. Now, when they return home to Portugal, their son Dom Pedro stayed behind to, make sure things were okay, to rule the country still. But what happens is when Portugal tried to make Brazil a colony again, the people of Brazil are going to protest, and they actually signed a petition. There was no real violence, there was no, anything like that, but they just signed a petition for independence. And what's unique about Brazil during this time is while other Central American countries and Latin American countries are, having troops and rebellion and things like that, Brazil's fight for independence is pretty peaceful. And even Dom Pedro, who was the leader of Portugal, the leader of Brazil from Portugal, he agrees. He agrees to the petition, and Brazil becomes an independent country in 1822. Okay, so here's a picture of Dom Pedro there. Okay, so to wrap it up, so leaders such as Bolivar and San Martin helped the people in South America fight for their independence from Spain. Mexico and other Central American countries fought for freedom against Spain as well. Remember, some of those Central American countries are going to split off from Mexico eventually and form their own countries. And finally, the unique thing about Brazil again is that Brazil, had a pretty peaceful revolution and just petitioned for their independence and were able to achieve it. Okay, so that's all I have for this lesson. So make sure you respond to the questions, and I will talk to you later.